So you are the person who solves the hard problems, the one who builds the system, ships the product, makes the data make sense. You got promoted because you are sharp, fast, and reliable. Your technical skills are undeniable. And yet, something keeps getting in the way. The meeting where you had the right answer but couldn't get anyone to listen. The feedback that said difficult to collaborate with when you were just being direct. The promotion that went to someone less technically capable, but somehow better at navigating the room. The conversation you replay in your head for 3 days because you couldn't figure out what went wrong. Nobody taught you this part, not in your degree, not in your boot camp, not on any onboarding program. The unspoken truth in tech culture is that being brilliant will get you hired, but it won't get you trusted, followed, or promoted past a certain point. And the skills that will, empathy, communication, reading a room, handling conflict without destroying a relationship, are the exact skills that the tech culture dismisses as soft, vague, or someone else's job. My guest today has spent 20 years inside Fortune 100 companies watching this play out. Colette Molteni is the founder of Empathy Elevated, a platform built specifically for high intellect professionals who are too smart to ignore the human side of work, but were never given the tools to master it. She frames empathy not as a personality trait, but as a professional skill, something that can be learned, practiced, and measured like any other system. Today, we are talking about why the smartest people in the room are often the worst at working with others. I know that. Why organizations are designed to produce emotionally unintelligent leaders, and what actually changes when a technical professional stops resisting the human layer and starts building it deliberately, practically, starting tomorrow. Colette, welcome to the Growth Hacking Culture podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Then thank you for the introduction and for having me on today. Yeah, and we're going to dive into these challenges that is tech people or people who are perhaps, like myself, who've been good at implementing and building the product and coding it in the background. But that other piece that often does not get taught with your degree or your corporate orientation program or boot camp or however you've received your formal education and the hard skills, often it does not cover. That's what has me so passionate on the topic. I've learned from quite a bit of trial and error within my own career. I've been again, thank you for having me on, and I'm happy to dive into the questions and answer for the audience today.
Isn't it crazy? I remember, when was it? Like 26 years ago, I finished my university. I did an engineering degree, never got any touch with any soft skills.
Mm,
I was speaking with someone who started going to the same university. It's close by. In Lausanne, there is a university for geeks. And he was telling me that there is still nothing to build soft skills. Why education doesn't care to give some additional tools for people to thrive at work, to be awesome? Why do you think is that?
yeah. And I can tell you, yeah, it hasn't really changed much. I got my degree in the 20 teens. So not too long ago, but well, actually, I guess over a decade ago now, but time moves so fast. There was no formal training of any sort. There was a little bit of a focus on organizational development and working together in a team and some introduction in terms of, well, of course, working in team projects, but very little. Why do I think this is not focused on? Because I think sometimes it is assumed maybe that you have it. It's also at times can be hard to quantify. Yet the ironic thing is, if you do not have that component with the people aspect or the human skills, as I like to refer to them, to work with fellow people, with when you're deploying technology or you're building something collaboratively, you're going through an agile sprint. If you don't have that under level, that current there, the hard skills, it's not going to, well, it's not going to matter as much. It's going to get harder to get buy-in, to get that cooperation, to get that distribution, the adoption, and to even hold the room when you're introducing something that's new and exciting.
That is true. Let me be a little bit more direct. In this tech culture, being the smartest person in the room is normal currency. EQ is often dismissed as soft, vague, or something HR invented. What the hell? You have spent 20 years inside of these Fortune 100 companies. How much career damage have you seen caused by brilliant people who couldn't read a room, handle a difficult conversation, or build trust?
Yeah. And I will say, so 20 years, it's cumulative if we go back to when I just started working, no college, nothing yet. I was very young and I started working at probably the lowest level you can come into a company, very entry level. I'd say that most of it I have witnessed truthfully over the 12 plus years that I've been in the data analytics space. About 8 of those years about sales operations and revenue operations, which is a highly collaborative role. In terms of the directness and having that aspect, I just think like EQ, again, I think it's sometimes tossed out at times. IQ is looked upon as the higher currency because you're the person who can get the job done. You can code, you have the skill, you can hit the ground running when you start a new role, or you're able to answer these questions quickly. You're able to take the horns and lead with a project and with the development. You don't need a lot of guidance, and perhaps you can work independently, which I am not dismissing the ability to have hard skills, but having that alone, the technical skills without the emotional intelligence component, it's challenging for you and those around you to get the necessary work done. What I will say also with EQ and just looking at that, I think it is getting more attention. We are talking it a little bit more. I mean, this term really came about in the 1990s. So if we look in the span of history, relatively recent, I think it is getting more attention. But how we activate it and how we leverage it and our own self awareness to be able to empathize and work with people. I think sometimes we can overestimate ourselves or we can assume we have that skill down. It takes practice. And that isn't something necessarily that yeah, I'll say in the middle of deadlines. I can speak to that right now. We're at the end of quarter in my own work at the time of this recording. I'm sure a lot of people in tech can relate to that, right? You're trying to get things done and you are very focused and honed in on the hard skills and the work. And it can be hard to tune into that aspect.
Have a problem also on the way companies also reward the improvements that you may have in terms of emotional intelligence. It's almost like the system is designed to produce emotionally unintelligent leaders because they will promote you. If you are
Mm,
super awesome, they will promote you. And they will say, yeah, next time this person will improve.
mm.
Is that a part of fault in the system itself? The companies not giving a damn about that.
It depends on the company, truthfully. I've worked in a full scope, a full range of companies. I've worked in the extreme of a company where I witnessed a manager call my manager, a senior leader, call my manager an idiot in front of me, and it be completely
What the hell?
tolerated, and not in like a joke or a banter type way, in actually a very cruel way. I've witnessed that extreme to the extreme of being in a company where nobody said anything and everything was perfect at all times, and everybody was smiling, even though people were cracking under the surface. So I've witnessed both. I think it depends. I think at the top it is, modeled. If you have a leader who, the very top, maybe the CEO, CFO, you have very high up leaders who very much live and breathe emotional intelligence and working with people well and listening and knowing people. I think that does radiate down. And I mean genuinely, not just saying it, but actually living that type of behavior. I think that type of behavior is more likely than to be rewarded through the various levels of leadership and then individual contributors as well. If you see the behavior that is not so nice, being cruel or just trying to get results no matter what, you witness yelling, name calling, or whatever else, behind closed doors, despite the HR policies in place. Yes, that behavior, if it's rewarded, that will radiate through various levels. And that's been my observation.
Yeah. I remember back in the days, fresh from university, innocent, I had a definition of emotional intelligence, and I thought back then that it was about being likable.
Mm,
Then I think I learned another definition that I memorized, and I was continuously repeating is to be in the shoes of the other.
mhm.
And I was repeating it without really understanding being in the shoes of somebody else, what it means exactly. Now, I would love to have your own definition. What is emotional intelligence? But tell it to me like the person I am. I'm an engineer. I need to understand it in a logical way, not in the Kumbaya way.
Yeah, definitely not in the kumbaya way, and am a fan of that, of course. Well, I am personally I don't have my degree in engineering, but I do engineering now, especially with AI enablement. That is my role. Coding, for the most part, self-taught. And I've worked even before that very closely with engineering teams, having been in data analytics and process engineering for many years with Six Sigma. So let me explain it in a way that makes sense for people like us. Emotional intelligence, it is not simply about what you are feeling, about what others are feeling, and about being kind or being that nice person in the room. Emotional intelligence, it is much more nuanced than that. It is about, as you said, being in other people's shoes, otherwise shorthand called empathy, which isn't necessarily always about feeling the other person's emotions. It's about understanding, analyzing them, having that data point and being able to understand, okay, what do they need from me? Or how am I going to make my point across? Or how am I going to get them on my side if I'm trying to convince them of something? What information and how should my reaction, how should my output, right? Just like I would code, how would the input coming in and the output, how do I need to program that and what do I need to say to make that work? Emotional intelligence is also about very similar to that social awareness, understanding your surroundings with you, right? Would you explain your code and what you have built out in the background to a team of fellow engineers the same way as you would explain to your stakeholders who are perhaps funding your project at the top, but they don't have the same technical ability? No, you would present it a little bit differently because ultimately you are trying to continue the funding, the timing, perhaps an extension of time or more resources. That's emotional intelligence in action. Another good way, I mean, I could talk about this for hours, but the last one I'll leave off on here is self awareness. And self awareness, and I talk about this often with the PACE system, which I'm sure we'll talk about more. Or you can read on Empathy Elevated about taking that pause to understand, right? That social awareness, but also looking inward and noticing, how did what I say, what was the impact of that? How am I coming across? Is my intent, is that coming out the right way? Because sometimes your intent can mismatch with what you're saying or how people are perceiving what you are doing or saying. So having that self-awareness to step back and take that pause in doing so. That's emotional intelligence, analyzing.
I love the way that you define it, and especially the fact about taking pause. So, and everything starts not even by understanding the other, like this definition about being in the shoes of
Mm,
somebody else. No, first you have to get to know yourself. So, what are your default modes? And today I get it a little bit better because I spend more time geeking on about understanding the brain. This is story about that by default, our brain is going to be emotional and we
mm,
need to have choices. And that's why in the word emotional intelligence is about waking up with a slap, this intelligence, which is just part of the brain. Is like most of our brain is just crap that we have been storing, maybe emotions, people that have been repeating reflexes about how we drive a car without even noticing or whatsoever. So it's about if we will never be able to prevent the emotions, but how do we wake up at one moment our intelligence to take a decision about showing or not, or what type of things that we're going to show to the others. That's why the concept of pause, I love it because that's
yeah.
what people. Okay, back in the days they were calling it like something else, but today is about being living the present moment, feeling
Yes.
that you have a little bit of breathing to wake up this intelligent part of your brain because the rest is just pure emotions. I love the concept of mindfulness in order to understand a little bit better how we feel because mindfulness is just about understanding. It's not about meditating, by the way, or the rest of us, or what I was thinking back in the days that it was about meditation. So I love that everything starts with knowing yourself before you can start understanding other people and even the surroundings because it's not about the discussion that we have you and me but about understanding the context, but you
Mhm.
start with yourself, and that I didn't have any clue back in the days.
I didn't either. No. And truthfully, emotional intelligence for me, It's funny because in all my years of working, and I started working very young, even before I went to college, I wanted to earn money. So I started working and doing this summer jobs and whatnot, even as a teenager. And one of the things that drew me to going into business and getting my degree was I would always tell people I want to be the manager that I would want to have myself. I want to be that manager. It doesn't mean being nice all the time, but being that supportive person, that listener, the person who helps break down boundaries. It helps me to grow. And I didn't have a name for it, emotional intelligence. Honestly, the concept of emotional intelligence, I wasn't really formally introduced to it until early in my career, a little bit after college, by a mentor of mine who gave me the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And at that point, I was introduced to it, read the book collected dust. But it did emerge a few years ago when I finally grabbed it out of the garage, started rereading and being interested in these concepts that I've been talking about for many years, but I wasn't associating that name. I'm going to give a little bit, go back to that pause concept, right? Or mindfulness. So I do have a system that I talk about and I do reference it often in my writing, the PACE system. And the PACE system stands for pause. That's the first step. Ask, consider, and empathize. Okay. And pause being the first step, oftentimes having that moment of introspection, or when those emotions come flooding in and you want to react or you want to say something, which is very easy to do when you are stressed. But taking that moment before you send off that email or you react to somebody or you make that assumption, asking, right? Clarifying questions. Don't go in assuming the worst. Ask clarifying questions. You might have perceived something wrong. Someone else might have perceived something wrong. Getting clarity to even get that pulse, considering what the other person is thinking. Now, this is thinking or feeling. It's not that you need to necessarily feel like it or become a wallow pity party, but considering the dynamics, considering, speaking of stress, right? Depending on maybe if you had to deliver some news on something or send an email that was maybe getting a negative reaction, perhaps you might get a different reaction out of somebody if it was maybe a calm time in the quarter. They were well fed, having just had lunch. It's a nice day outside. They are not overheated versus a day where it is, there's a heat wave and they have several deadlines piling up and they're hungry. They haven't had lunch. They haven't had a break, right? That information is going to be received differently to that person, right? So considering the environment, having that awareness. And then empathy being the step that follows from being able to pause, ask, and consider, where empathy really, as a natural default, again, this is your trial and error, does fall into place through these steps for most people. For the most part, and I say this, I always put this, I like to put this caveat in. We are capable of empathy, even if we feel, we're not a super emotional person. It can be cognitive empathy, taking in those data points and knowing how to react and understand our surroundings and the people around us. Empathy, we are capable of it. There's only a very, very small percentage of the population that is unable to empathize. But for the most part, we are. It's just often a matter of activating it, practicing it, and leveraging it for the good of our work and those around us as well.
Now is the time to bitch about corporate trainings because the way
My
emotional intelligence has been misused, mistrained by corporation is amazing. I remember 20 years ago, I had my first training that was related to emotional intelligence, and it was a 2 days, maybe 3 days, but maybe yeah, let's say 2 days for the sake of the conversation training, and it was a training like slides, definitions, examples. How the hell do we learn emotional intelligence with that type of crap? After that training, I forgot everything except the definition because I wanted to show that I had emotional intelligence. How do we train it? I also heard in the positive side, but that was only 10 years ago. And maybe it was before that Google had implemented a training on emotional intelligence for tech people. And I remember the book,
Mm,
and I read the book, Search Inside Yourself, and I found it
mm,
beautiful because you are forced to practice. Practice what you mentioned, systems, like the pay system.
yes.
System. If you don't have a mental system, it's not about memorizing or having all the different situations and acting according to the situation. No, it's mental system to progress. So, what is your take about how education of emotional intelligence is going into the corporate world, and what could be the best way to do it to make it happen?
Yeah. Yeah, a few things on that. So I do see the benefit in emotional intelligence training in terms of a baseline, right? Or much like a book that I read, it gave me the introduction or having the foundational, putting a label to perhaps, the behaviors you would like to see and having something to identify with that and perhaps even having some examples. But as you said, it's not about memorization. It is about practice, much like anything else. I'll give a good example, right? I learned a program, a dashboarding program, Tableau, many years ago, actually. And I just went to the conference about 2 months ago, how to make beautiful visualizations out of data, how to analyze data and make it presentable and digestible. Of course, I did a training to learn the baseline of it, but ultimately, that is not enough to make it stick. I had to practice it, I had to leverage it. It is a hard skill, right? Being able to do some coding in the background, some drag and drop and making it, but I had to practice, I had to iterate over time and learn what worked for me and what my style was. I don't like every visual option in there. I don't use every single thing I learned. And maybe after those few days of learning, a lot of it went out the window, but I activated it at the time that I needed it and I leveraged it and I practiced it and I've been able to practice it in real time. So that's the first part of your question, right? About, how can we actually learn it? So practicing it in real time and making a point of it and building it into a system that you can use, being in that environment. Speaking of environment as well, I think trainings are beneficial. I've been through many corporate trainings. They can be beneficial, but sometimes they're not. They are beneficial if they are actually coming in with the intention to change and you have the people around who have endorsed this training, especially leadership, exhibiting the behaviors as well. If you go through a training and there's a whole group of you and you go through the training at all different levels, and then Monday comes around and the same behaviors continue that were meant to be trained out, it was a waste of everybody's time. It was a waste of everybody's time. It's just that, and at that point, you're just checking a box. We've had this training. That's great. We've taught it. But if it's not actually being leveraged in the way that is intended, you can have the best training in the world. I suppose it goes back to that expression. Gosh, and I saw it this past weekend. I think I was on social media when I won't name it, but the one that has reels and short videos. I'm sure we all know. And I saw something,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, there's so many different ones. But I saw a quote about, somebody, you can't force somebody to change. They'll only change if they want to change themselves. And training applies the same way. You can have an HR training with well intentions or a training from an outside consultant, a beautiful training, but you have somebody in the room who, they're forced to be there. They have no intent in practicing anything they've learned. They think it's all BS. And then if the environment is not conducive for them to do it either, maybe they do have good intent, but the environment is not conducive come Monday or Tuesday, the next week to practice what they've done, it just won't be effective. So,
I see already some pieces of the puzzle of what you have mentioned regarding learning that skill, that hard skill that is called
mm,
emotional intelligence. So there is a little bit of knowledge because we need to have definitions to understand and sometimes understand a little bit how the brain is made of because we always
yes.
believe that the brain is full of intelligence. No ways, especially us human.
No,
No,
no.
doesn't work. Little bit of knowledge, then a system, right? To start practicing, like the base system. Then we need practice. And then I was thinking something that you and me, something that we have been discussing in the past about iterations. We need to have iterations. That's exactly like sprints where we go validate because what worked for you may not work for me. And it is possible to have some data and pivot, improve, or whatsoever with these little practices that we do, but it's continuous. We cannot wake up emotional intelligence preparing like for an exam in university.
No, which I had done plenty of. And I did have a good system for that. But practicing emotional intelligence, it is different. And you bring up a good point about what works for one person or situation. It varies, right? It varies what you're going to do. So I will give an example of this very early in my career. I was told by a leader that I was not being a team player. Why was I not being a team player? Well, her approach to building her team, and she wanted me to learn from her. Imagine this, we were in an office with many cubicles, right? And the team, we had about 8 people or so in this little section. And she liked to give encouragement to the team, shouting over the cubicles, very loud. She could project her voice, very loud, very excited, full of life, even at 7:30 in the morning. My goodness, which I actually am more of a morning person now, but even with that, that's just not my style to do that. I have no problem being on the stage. I've given talks, speeches, and that is no challenge at all, but it's just not my style to do that. I am more of a person to go up and perhaps when there's a quiet moment to interject, have that quiet moment and, express my gratitude for how well of a job they've done and point to an exact example. Shouting over cubicles is not my thing. And that was the example that she gave me, that I was not being a team player because I was not doing that. Now, in her mind, that was, I suppose, emotional intelligence, building a team, building that relationship management. For me, that does not work. Right. So don't assume what works for one person, it works for another person. And I'm not saying that's bad. It just did not work for me. Another thing, too, in terms of context. So speaking of agile and iterations, and I know our collaborative posts that we did, oh gosh, it was about
3 weeks
several
ago.
weeks ago. Yeah, but 3 weeks ago, several weeks ago now. Time is moving so quickly. We did this post and we were talking about agiles and sprints and doing them individually and doing them as a group. You have to take into consideration, especially with a group and you're doing these iterations and like an agile sprint, which I've been in many working in tech over the years. Every group is going to be different. Every vendor, every consultant partner, everybody's going to be a little bit different in their style. So you have to take into consideration how you engage, even culturally. And I don't think we touched on that necessarily on the article, but culturally as well. I've worked on sprints where I've worked globally with global teams, and you have to take that into consideration on top of the time zone. But what is, mm, typically, it does pay to do some homework and get a feel for the team before you
Yeah.
dive in and what your approach is going to be.
Mm. And always it will be like starting assumptions about the team. It cannot be even validated until you are going through the sprints, the
Mhm,
realities. But you need a
mhm.
little bit of starting points because going just in the blind is a little bit too much.
And I'll give an example, and this was not a sprint, but I was leading a Kaizen workshop, which is essentially a very intense several day workshop, Lean Six Sigma, where you do a lot of the baseline discovery, measurement analytics as well, and you get some measurement. I was doing this overseas. I went to Australia actually a few weeks ago, and I'd never been before. I've known many people from Australia in my life, actually, from living internationally, but being in an office and running a workshop like this is a different story. It was a very positive experience. Something I discovered culturally, very different than American culture, was the level of, at least the folks I was working with, and they told me this too, the level of joking and banter going back and forth and humor interjected along the way, right? And once I learned that, I mean, I went in with it too. It was fun. Now, if I were to take that approach, though, that same approach, running a Kaizen workshop in perhaps a culture that was a little bit more serious, a little bit more direct and to the point, I don't believe that would go over so well. But having a little bit of that understanding, right, for the environment you're in and adapting accordingly can go a long way. For me, it was very welcome. I enjoyed it. So I like injecting some humor into our work, right? We don't have to be, it all being serious. That can be a little bit draining for me. So
Course, of course. This is part of this environment that we need to do and understand as part of the emotional intelligence. What is the setup, the environment that we want to have in order to make it more easy for our emotions to be understood within the team, within ourselves. Now, you were mentioning also one moment when we were discussing about how does it look like the ideal development of emotional intelligence, especially in the corporate world.
hmm,
You mentioned that something that is quite difficult is to measure the outcomes.
hmm,
Now it's becoming a little bit easier. So let's geek a little bit more. Some companies are already experimenting with the AI coaches, AI mentors, AI
hmm.
tools. Can AI really develop this emotional intelligence because there is someone beside of you listening about how you interact, how if you made the pause that it was fundamental for us as in a situation. Are we going in less than 1 year? Because the tools already exist. They are not yet awesome, but I have the hope that it could be. What is your take on that? Are we going to
Yeah.
become a little bit better if we have something to remind us to be better?
I'm an optimist and I do look forward and I want to the technology that is emerging. I've been an early adopter my entire life with working with technology and believing the best. I mean, there's always hiccups along the way. and refinements to be done. What I would say when it comes to AI and emotional intelligence, and I say this is a way of using AI in partnership, right? It does not replace our emotional intelligence. It cannot be a substitute for us because, well, just as the name implies, artificial. It is artificial. It is imitating based off of, let's say give it hundreds of textbooks and inputs, and these are the qualitative data points, and please, spit this out to the person and tell them objectively, this is a better thing to say, maybe tweak this in your writing. Like that's a very good use case for AI, like running an email through and seeing, maybe is there some language that maybe I can adjust here so it's better received? Is there something I could say a little bit better, a little bit smoother, a little bit more clear so it is better understood? And with AI, I mean, even right now in my work, we have tools that do sentiment analysis in terms of listening to recorded conversations that exist, that are available at the disposal of leaders to be able to coach people on their team. The key thing with all of this, though, is to remember it is a tool just like anything else. You are still the human who you can learn, much like taking a class, maybe an HR directed class, right? And these are 10 things you can memorize and you can learn. But at the end of the day, you as the human, you are responsible for how you express it, what you hit send on, what you say, your facial expressions, perhaps during a tense meeting, what you say to somebody who is not understanding what you're saying, rather than reacting in frustration, perhaps trying to get clarification and bridging that and empathizing with them to try and meet them in the middle and have that more emotionally intelligent conversation. AI is a tool. It is a very good tool, but it is not a replacement. And the human to human learning and practice, I do not believe it will replace that.
Uh, Well, there is part of me, just making a small
Please
parenthesis.
challenge me.
There is part of me who says we are putting the human side up there, but in fact, we mime behaviors. So artificial intelligence also mime behavior. So we think that we are super clever, but this adoption of what I am today, Ivan Palomino, that looks funny with his Spanish accent, his miming of
Yes.
empathy, despite the fact that I am an introvert or whatsoever. That's a miming. So I say to myself, AI is also miming. So is
Mm.
there a big difference? We believe that we have something unique, probably in the part of how they say innovation, creativity. We are still in a big gap versus AI alone, but I don't think that even there we cannot match human. That's
Hmm.
just a thought. It's not even to
Yeah.
provoke you. This is just
No, 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 no. This is good. This is good to have open conversation. And the technology in itself, yeah, it will become more humanoid like over the years. I do truly think that. I mean, even the technology I've seen in my lifetime, from what I saw when I was very young to what we have now, it would have been unimaginable what we have. I guess my challenge back would be with, let's say you have like an AI you're conversing with and can at least imitate, empathy back to you and imitate compassion back to you. And you see that across on your screen, or I don't know, even a robot perhaps in the future talking to you that has almost like a humanoid like structure, right? Versus a human who is sitting across from you and deeply actually feeling that emotion, or they're cognitively really able to place themselves in the situation you're in. Unconsciously, as humans, we are social animals. We don't we do crave that human interaction. Most of us do, even the introverts in us, we do. I'm personally in the middle. I'm what you call an ambivert. So I'm not an introvert. I'm not an extrovert. I'm kind of in the middle, depending on the day or the context. So I understand that, but I'm not so sure that's going to change in the future, even with the best of AI that can understand and really take in the nuance at that craving for that human interaction is going to change. It's instinctual, and we're not even really, it's subconscious. We don't even recognize it necessarily, but there is a different feeling you get. Yeah. Well, I mean, even without AI, there's a different feeling you get after maybe writing your deepest thoughts and putting it in a notebook versus talking to a person and then having that person provide feedback, even if you don't agree with it. But it's a different engagement for the mind.
yeah,
Not
yeah,
that one is better than the other, but depending on what you are seeking.
yeah.
So,
I heard or I read somewhere that you were like practicing habit formation. Let me put it into context just to remind you.
mm,
You have talked about small, repeatable inputs that produce measurably different outputs using, for instance, using someone's name, small little things, small behaviors, pausing before you react, asking one genuine question before presenting your solution. And yeah, I'm a fan of habit formation, by the way. But for most of humankind, when you have a discussion about habit formation, they tell you, this is almost too simple, will not work. You have to get discipline and then do it. So that's my conversation with my German friend. Anyways, so why does it work? And why do most smart people resist starting there with these small little practices, repetitions that you do during the.
Yeah. And I'm not perfect by any means. I give you an example of something that is so simple that I keep forgetting to do. And I've been forgetting, and I really need to do it in the heat of summer right now in the Northern Hemisphere. The advice of drinking a glass of room temperature water, right? Right when you wake up in the day, it can help you to feel more hydrated, wake you up, even before I have, my cup of espresso. Right. It's something so easy to pour a cup of water, and I keep forgetting to do it. Right. So sometimes these simple things are easy to forget, but that's not EQ related. These things work when you see them over time, you see the reactions, you see in the absence of doing them what happens. And if you are conscious enough to take note and take those inputs of data and reflect and take that moment, you do notice the difference. And it's sometimes not even like a big thing from a small gesture, but you notice perhaps, that person, and, I've experienced this in corporate, that person who maybe at the end of their day, you have a request that's floating out there, or on a group email, and they step in to help you, or you have that person who steps in to answer that question when you're presenting and you feel like the expression the deer in the headlights, and you don't know how to respond, and they step in to help you. These small acts, these small gestures, the expression what goes around comes around, it is visible, and in the absence of them, if you're not looking, you might not notice. And they seem so simple, but they do have a big impact. So that's the thing I would leave people with, just to start acting on these things that are small and that work for you. Like you mentioned the naming example, right? Remembering people's names. Truthfully, I write people's names to remember it really quick after I meet somebody. It helps me to retain it, and then I can acknowledge them, whether it be neighbors or colleagues that I do see when I go into office. People love hearing their own name. It's such a small gesture, but it does make an impact with warming up the conversation.
That's a big flaw that there is in human brains, is that we always have expectations and we want to have quick results. And it is not possible sometimes to do a permanent change or something that is sustainable for the long term if you don't start something compounding the small little behaviors that you repeat constantly, so that your brain gets used to something and it becomes a reflex. And it's good that what you mentioned is that is about taking notes, tracking that you are progressing. It's only that because by default we will not even notice, and you
Mm.
have done it for 1 month, and you will feel like nothing changes unless you open your big tracker and say, wow, I did it 20 times, and this is what I have seen as a.
Consistency, consistency. And then also with the fable, the tortoise and the hare, right? The tortoise that's consistent and slow, but the tortoise ultimately wins in the end. Not
Exactly.
that EQ, not that EQ is a competition, but it does incrementally over time. Consistency.
Exactly. For a technical professional listening right now, an engineer, a data scientist, a product manager who knows his or her EQ is holding them back but doesn't know where to start, what's the first move? Not a book recommendation, please. Something that they can practice like tomorrow.
Well, congratulations. You have done the first move by having self awareness. I will say that because often that is one of the most challenging things, right? Having that self awareness, like, maybe I should examine this. Maybe there is something that I can adjust slightly in my behavior to be perceived differently, or to make this a little bit more seamless when I'm trying to do my everyday work, whether it's in my working relationships, personal relationships, or whatever else. Okay. In terms of an action, though, the first thing I would try to find is something that you can systematize. If you're anything like me, very analytical, very logical, building things, we like systems, we like mental models, and find something. There is a ton of literature out there in terms of, and I'm not going to make any book recommendations or things to make you more emotionally intelligent or things you can look up, you can read about, and I write often on the topic. Find what works for you, but you do have to take that moment of introspection. Find a system or something routine that you can practice. It doesn't need to be a bunch of things. It can be just one that you start practicing, and then you can add more and find what works for you.
And I love that. You just destroy all the corporate training industry that is millions of dollars with EQ because you are saying it doesn't help. What could help is go practice. Go just get some information. You need some data points. Go to Empathy Elevated Substack that you write and do it.
Thank you.
You are
Thank you.
also
Yes.
that's number one. Number one, go practice. Go do iteration, small little practice of repetitive behaviors that takes you 1 or 2 minutes per day to repeat.
Mm-hmm.
Simple. Take the data, validate. After 7 days, validate. Just a little bit of comments and iterate. No one, if you have created and found a system that works for you, no one else can give you as much wealth of information to get improved is even 10,000 better than going to a training that you're going to forget just afterwards. Thank you for destroying this industry, Colette.
No, I'm not trying to destroy an industry, but yeah, my ultimate hope is that anybody who's tuned in today and listening, some food for thought, a way to action on this. And if you do have that awareness, congratulations again. You've taken the first step. And that's how I started myself years ago, even before I started writing Empathy Elevated. So takes time,
That's
but you've taken the first step.
good. Colette, how can people find you out and ask you questions? Because you are,
Please.
because I follow your Empathy Elevated Substack, and you are the person who understands how the technical mind is working, and you're talking so much about this emotional intelligence. So how can they reach you out to ask you questions and have a nice chat like we have got several times
Yeah.
now?
Yeah. Yeah. Ivan, thank you for that. So I am very big about collaboration. I think we all grow together, even regardless if you are a writer and you have less subscribers or more subscribers. I don't care. Let's chat. If you're interested to learn more, you can find me on empathyelevated.substack.com. My name again is Colette Molteni. I believe I am the only Colette Molteni in the world if you Google me. So I have a very unique name. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, but I am very active on Substack. You will find me there. You can DM me. You can comment on one of my posts. I do posts every Monday here, with very rare exception. If I'm traveling and unable to answer, I do respond to comments. I post notes. Please find me. I love doing coffee or tea chats or lemonade chats. It is hot right now in the Northern Hemisphere. So drop me a line. I love to collaborate or just chat, even if it's not for like a formal recording or write up like this. But I love to meet people from all around the world. That's the beauty of technology. So I'd love to meet you.
This is amazing, Colette. Thank you for this wealth of information. And finally, emotional intelligence for people like me. Thank you. Have an excellent day.
You too, Ivan. Thanks for having me on.